Attila the Hun. We kind of covered the Huns in our last episode, and we talked about how they were, civilized barbarians, I guess you could say. And this applied to Attila, of course. He wasn't a wolf-born bush baby that came out of his mother ferocious and thirsting for blood. In fact, he wasn't just a typical Hun either. He was the son of nobles. He had a privileged childhood. His father had passed away early on in his life, so his two mentors were his uncles, and they were actually the joint rulers of the Hunnic Empire at this time, Ruga and Oktar. And they were the most powerful force north of the Danube River and pretty fair ways east, right? So they covered an immense amount of land. The Hunnic Empire was actually, it was getting close to rivaling the Roman Empire in size, though in capability, it probably overcame the Roman Empire. Well, not probably, it definitely did, and we see that with how easily they dispatched the Romans repeatedly. And this is where Attila comes into the story. So he was born into a situation where, they were already whooping Rome's ass, right? And within a couple of years of his birth, in fact, Alaric, actually, the king of the Visigoths, had actually sacked Rome, right? So he grew up looking at the previous greatest empire and noticing how it fell and noticing its weaknesses and noticing where it could be exploited. And that's an important thing to remember later on in the story. But anyway, we don't actually know the specific date of when Attila was born. And you guys are going to hear this repeated over and over and over again when it comes to ancient history. But we have two suspected dates, one of them being the late 4th century and the other being the early 5th century. And those specific dates are 395 AD or 406 AD. And so there's about a deviation of 10 years. The big difference here with his dates is either how old he was when he died and how old he was when he accomplished some of the things he did. Either way, he did them. We're certain of that. We know that. We just don't know if he was a little bit more of a baby face or a little bit more of a grizzled man when he did. And for a long time, it wasn't just Attila. Growing up, he actually had his brother, Bleda, with him as well. He'll be briefly mentioned, but he's more of a side character. He's not nearly as important as the man, the myth, the legend himself, Attila the Hun. And yeah, as we mentioned in the previous episode with the Hunnic people, they were on horses from the time they were toddlers. And, being the son of a noble, it was no different. You could actually say the expectation was greater. Attila and his brother, both from the age of probably 3 years old, were on horseback, learning archery, learning all the ins and outs of how to operate with this incredible animal and become one with it, right? Really become a lethal unit with it. And these are just kind of little backstory pieces of information that kind of give you guys a little bit of context as to who they were and why they were the way they were. Lastly, and really the only notable thing you could say about Attila's childhood before we move on to the beginning of his reign is both him and his brother learned warfare and strategy from a very young age. So you'd have to imagine the benefit that would pose being in the war room, or in the case of the Huns, in the circle of horses, listening to all your elders and your father and your uncles and all the experienced people of your empire discussing how they're going to go and subjugate some more people. So you kind of get a feel for that martial lifestyle, the lifestyle of a war. You become no stranger to it. In fact, you're molded in it. And last but not least, probably something that could be overlooked as, it's just a language, but something that's actually incredibly important is it's speculated that Attila and his brother both knew how to speak Gothic and Latin. So you could imagine while he's conquering these people, he doesn't need to rely on a third-party translator, somebody who, can misinform or misinterpret what he's trying to say or get across to the people that he's trying to subjugate. No, he can directly communicate with the people he's dealing with, either Roman or Goth. And like Riley, could you imagine imagine running a business and you have different divisions, right? And you have a French division, a Spanish division, and you have complex orders to give to them, but yet you have to go through this 18-year-old intern who just graduated high school. You know what I mean?
Well, man, a better example. I've literally worked with foreign countries in the military, so I know exactly what it's like to have English speakers and then Romanians and have to try to communicate with them. This would have been really important, knowing the languages of the people he was dealing with. And also, you got to remember that a lot of what Attila ends up doing is negotiation. So knowing the Roman and the Gothic languages was super important.